It's
Perfect.
recording now.
Awesome. Okay, great. Hi everyone. I am Kylee Van Horn, and I am a registered sports dietitian. I run Fly Nutrition, and work myself and my co-dietitian Emily. We work with runners, skiers, triathletes, helping people wade through the fueling information out there and try to come up with what is scientifically sound and then what is going to work for your lifestyle as far as fueling goes. So we do everything from race fueling plans to daily nutrition help. We work with eating disorders up to people that are trying to lose weight. So we have a lot of different skill sets in regards to the ability to work with a wide variety of endurance specific athletes. And I do want to make a note. I do consider everyone that does some form of like training or activity an athlete. I think that's a question we get a lot, is people think, well, I'm not this high level person. And I would say, like, if you participate in these sports, we consider you athletes. So just wanted to clarify that. And then you can
Absolutely.
also find me at Trail Runner Magazine, Outside Online, and Women's Running. I do a lot of freelance writing for them too.
Yes, we both do. I think that's
Yeah.
how I found you. So we'll go right into the questions. There's some general and some specific, but it does seem like there's a pretty good amount of questions about meals throughout the day and in relation to when they run, and then also snacking. So I know that's kind of a general topic, but maybe we could go into how to structure your meals and your
Mhm.
snacking depending on like when you're running and perhaps what you're running.
Yeah, this is such a broad topic, so it's like hard to fully know where to go to get started here. But like when we start working with athletes, typically we are asking them, like, what does your structure look like for your fueling throughout your day? And that really is going to vary. Like you were saying, Corey, like it depends on your training schedule and your work schedule and all of that kind of stuff. But in general, I think having a framework of like 3 meals a day is going to be my goal. It doesn't have to be labeled breakfast, lunch, dinner. 3 meals a day, 1 to 3 snacks a day, I think is a good like framework for yourself. And then thinking about, where am I putting where am I doing my workouts? And then thinking about, okay, here's how I want to structure or set up then my meals and snacks throughout the day. For instance, if you're running in the morning, like early in the morning, you might want to have like a small snack before you do your run or training session in the morning, and then you do a full-on meal afterwards, and then you do like your other 2 meals throughout the day and maybe another snack or two. But if on the opposite side of things, if you're running after work, maybe you have your breakfast or your meal one, meal two, a snack or two, and then you're having like a pre-workout snack before your evening workout, and then you have dinner later after that. So trying to think about like, what does that look like for me in regards to my like training and work schedule, and then how can I set up this meal and snack structure? I think a lot of people do well with some basic guidelines for snacks and meals to kind of get them started. So when we're looking at snacks, I kind of classify snacks as like being, a pre-workout snack, post-workout snack, or like regular everyday snack that's maybe not around a workout, and thinking about different nutrition components to those snacks. So when you make your shopping list for the week, having like a pre-workout option, a post-workout option, and then some other like daily snack options can be a good way to like set up your snacks for the week. We find that a lot of our athletes that we're starting with don't actually have any kind of snack planning going on, but we like to encourage people to do that, to have a general sense of like what could be good options for me in these different situations. So pre-workout, you're going to be looking for mostly simple carbohydrates. maybe a little bit of protein and fat, especially for those that tend to maybe, there are people that experience rebound hypoglycemia where you would have like a quick spike and drop in blood sugar, which can make you feel like a little bit shaky at the beginning of your run. So if that's something that you experience, then maybe you need to have a little bit of protein and fat with your carbohydrate source, pre-run or pre-training session. It doesn't, I always get the question about, what if I get up super early? Like, do I actually need to have something? And I think that's going to depend on the person and the situation. I wish I didn't have to say that, but I do. I mean, all of this stuff needs to be personalized ideally. But for my female athletes, especially athletes that have a history of REDS or eating disorders, injury history, I suggest having something beforehand. For some of my male athletes, there might be a little bit of flexibility there. But regardless, any workout that is over an hour in duration or is higher intensity, I do suggest that you have something in the morning. So
Wait,
what I'm,
can I touch on one thing?
yeah.
You made a pretty important point or distinction. Why would a female athlete need to eat something in the morning versus a male athlete?
Yeah, so the research is kind of pointing to female athletes not training fasted because of it not being optimal for injury risk, and then higher risk of REDS, underfueling, that sort of thing, which can happen in males as well, I should say, but like the maybe hormonal implications and injury risk might operate a little bit differently. And I'm mainly talking about less than an hour of activity here. So I want to be clear that like I'm not saying that male athletes should go and do a long run fasted. I'm saying like if it's a 30-minute run in the morning, you may or may not need fuel if you are a male athlete. And that's something again that I think you need to be very careful with. Like I always err on the side of I'm just gonna fuel my workouts, like that's the easiest thing to do. So for my athletes, I know that people want more nuance than that and they want to have a personalized approach. And so always looking at like what is this athlete's history with injuries? What do they have any health conditions? What is their history? Like, do they have eating disorder history? Is there possible underfueling or REDS going on? So like all of these things need to be taken into account when you're figuring out, should I do something beforehand or not? And again, like erring on the side of, yes, I should probably have something is the best way to go. Like the argument typically is, I just don't want anything or I'm not hungry, which, okay, understand. But also like I get I'm trying to become more fat adapted. Realistically, you going and doing your training is going to make you more fat adapted than you doing a 60-minute run with no fuel. And I guess overall, I will say too, like if you are pushing the envelope of fasting, like that is definitely going to be a riskier approach for your training. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. But like
Yeah.
in the morning, sorry, there's like motorcycles going by here. In the morning, if you have limited time, I think a lot of athletes forget like you can have hydration mix as get calories in through hydration mix. You can have applesauce. You could have blended baby food pouches. You could have a spring energy food blend. Like you could have your sports nutrition products that you use during long runs. You could have those beforehand. So if you're like worried about solid foods, there are more blended options, liquid options for you to get calories in. You can do graham crackers, you can do cookies, you can do crackers, a granola bar. It does not have to be this complex full-on breakfast at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning. So just thinking, mostly carbohydrate, maybe a little bit of protein and fat. Size wise, again, this always gets into this discussion. Like, I usually have my athletes build their pre-workout and post-workout snack routine based on like the type of training day it is, the intensity, all that kind of stuff. So like one athlete might have a certain snack option for a workout that's an hour or less, but then over an hour they might do something a little bit bigger, and then for a long run they're doing like 500 to 700 calories, which is almost meal like, but like essentially having something bigger before that long run occurs. So giving yourself options and scaling based on like what you're doing with your training, I think is in my opinion, like the best approach for athletes to be taking.
And
So that
you had,
kind of went on a tangent there for just pre-workout. We've got all these other things, but keep going.
yeah, that's fine. No, you had said something, you said reds, which people may not be familiar with.
Oh, okay.
So, maybe
Yeah.
we could go into that and the symptoms of that. Like
Do you want
if
me to?
someone's,
So, yeah, I'll explain reds. How about I finish the post-workout and the regular daily snack thing, and then I'll talk about that because I think it would then
perfect.
I'll be continuing the snack combo here. Um, Pre-workout, then we got post-workout. So post-workout, if you have a meal post-workout, you don't need to worry about having a post-workout snack. If you are not having a meal, and I would say time-wise, like if you're not having a meal within an hour, then I would suggest having some kind of post-workout snack most of the time. If you're doing a 30-minute run and then you have a meal an hour and a half later, the world will not end. But again, basing it on like prioritizing post-workout snack as close to the end of a workout as you can for a high intensity workout and a long workout, or sorry, a long run over an hour or 2 hours. So when we're looking at post-workout, big things are enough protein, so at least 20 grams of high quality protein, and then 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrates. So one of the easier things that a lot of my athletes do will keep a recovery mix in their car, add it to water when they're done, get it down, good to go. You could, bring some of my athletes bring a cooler with a smoothie they make ahead of time, or like a turkey sandwich or something like more complex. But that's up to you. Like it could be very simple. It could be like a builder bar. It could be yogurt with granola and fruit or something as well. So just thinking about like where you're going to finish your run, what does that look like, and then being prepared. And then for the regular daily snack, I usually give a calorie guideline. 200 to 300 calories is a good kind of snack size. If you're doing less than that, sometimes it can be less satisfying of a snack, and you might then want something else 30 minutes later. And then if you're doing something more, it starts to get into meal territory. So 200 to 300 calories is a good like size if you're looking for context. And then trying to pair your macronutrients or have 2 macronutrients in a snack when you can is a good way to kind of think about planning your snack. So reason being is that we can keep better blood sugar balance that way. And then also it allows for us to have more steady energy intake throughout the day. Because if I always give the example, if you just have an apple for a snack, great source of micronutrients and carbohydrates, but it is still going to spike and drop your blood sugar pretty quickly, which is going to leave you typically hungry not that long after. So if you pair that apple with a little peanut butter or almonds or yogurt or something like that, that can give you additional macronutrients and micronutrients, and then it keeps that blood sugar more stable, keeps your energy levels more stable. So when you're thinking about your shopping list for the week, pairing, like having more than one macronutrient in your snacks, and then 200 to 300 calories for the regular daily snack, and then pre-workout, post-workout snack options for yourself. So hopefully that gives context on the snack idea. I kind of talked about meal structure, 1 to 3 snacks a day. And then meal structure wise, like I don't want to get into maybe all of the specifics there, but like one of the biggest things that we see when starting with endurance athletes is that they have pretty imbalanced meals at certain times throughout the day. Like for breakfast, they might have like oatmeal with blueberries, which is great, but like you're missing protein and fat there. So trying to think about like the balance in your meals when you're thinking of planning your meals, like, do I have a protein source, a fruit and or vegetable source, a fat source, and then also maybe an additional carbohydrate source like potatoes, rice, oats, pasta, something like that, that's a little bit more carb concentrated, to get my carbs in my meal, because our athletes that try to rely on fruit for their carbohydrate consumption tend to underdo it on carbs, because fruit is not as concentrated of a carb source. So to give a context there, 1 cup of cooked rice is 45 grams of carbs. 1 cup of fruit, 1 cup of berries, let's say, is about 10 grams of carbs. So in order to get 45 grams of carbs, you would have to eat 4.5 cups of strawberries, whereas you could eat 1 cup of rice and have 45 grams of carbs. So, you know, thinking about like how realistic is that? My stomach's likely going to hurt if I'm trying to do that and like achieve my carb goals. So that's why we suggest having an additional like more concentrated carb source in addition to fruit and or veggies. So that's a starting place on meals. And then obviously, I guess a big thing that we do with endurance athletes is teach you how to adjust your macronutrients, so your meal composition for different days of training, which is that's why we typically work with athletes on a 12-week period of time, because it's a process trying to figure out like how to do this without the use of a tracking tool, and without being overly obsessive, which we're all about. So it does take some time to learn how to do that. But I will say, if you are not adjusting your nutrition for different days of training, that's already a red flag, and you should likely be trying to do something to increase nutrition on heavier, higher intensity days and longer training days. So that's kind of my meal thing. I guess I can talk about, so that's meals, snacks. Then we're going to talk about REDS, which is relative energy deficiency in sport. So REDS typically occurs if an athlete, it could be intentional or unintentional. So intentional is where an athlete is intentionally trying to lose weight, and they are underfueling to the point of kind of no return, like they're training more than they are supporting their body with fuel, and it leaves them in this energy deficient state, and that is intentional because you're intentionally trying to lose weight. That doesn't mean that somebody can't try to lose weight and, you know, avoid REDS, but you have to be careful, because there's a fine line between restricting too much and ending up in REDS, and then also just losing weight in maybe a more intentional, slow manner. There is unintentional REDS, which is underfueling that occurs as a result of an athlete not recognizing or realizing how much fuel they need for different days of training, different training volumes and intensities. And that can occur. I will say that REDS can occur in any gender. So it's not just like someone that gets a period. It could be male, female, whatever you identify as, you could get REDS. Intentional, unintentional, underfueling, and kind of doing more training and not supporting that training. And then symptoms of REDS could include loss of period if you're someone that's supposed to get a period, but that is not always the case, obviously, because anyone can get it. So there a lot of red flags might be sleep disturbances, recurrent stress fractures, hormonal issues, so testosterone, estrogen deficiency issues, I'm trying to think, shakiness, headaches, issues with like feeling like you're not adapting to your training or not able to maybe push yourself in training. So I guess there are a number of symptoms for REDS, and I would say, like, self-diagnosing REDS is not something that I would recommend that you do. I would recommend that you see a medical professional to help you, either a dietitian, or an MD, that can help you with. There are certain criteria that we use, to ask questions and look at what symptoms someone's experiencing to kind of help us determine whether, an athlete, if we are dealing with a red situation. So I feel like, again, I would say, like, if you lose your period, or if you are somebody that does get recurrent stress fractures, those are like really big red flags for reds, and we'll always do an evaluation on those athletes. And then if you're not somebody in that category, that doesn't mean you can't have reds. We would do some other, like, questioning and trying to help kind of figure out and guide.
Perfect. That was good.
Um,
You know, I think I wanted to add a couple things. One is a lot of the questions were kind of about meal planning, portion sizes, what to eat. Um, and for those that may not be aware, this may be my fault because it's not labeled as well as it should, but in the resources of Final Surge, if you go under becoming a better runner through proper nutrition, this is Kylee has done excellent handouts, and they break everything down what she just said into portion sizes, snack ideas, you know, your target ratios for carbs, fats, proteins, ideas for snacks with the nutritional information. So really just like everything that she went through in a nice visual format. That's in the resources section of Final Surge, and it's under becoming a better runner through proper nutrition, along with the first webinar we did with her probably a year and a half ago. So I just wanted to add that in there. You know, if you were looking for more information and specifics on what she just talked about, that's a great place to go.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize, like, if it's the athlete plate model that is in there on building your meals, that just keep in mind that that is an example of meal composition. So, it is based on an athlete that's around a body frame size of 120 to 130 pounds. So if that is not you, then, you might require more or less fuel than that. And so that's where, like, personalizing and trying to figure out what your needs are is really important. So, I just want to make that disclaimer because if somebody is a bigger body frame size and they're trying to follow those recommendations, I just worry about somebody under fueling. So I don't want that to happen.
Um, so there's kind of two similar questions. One, and I think we've talked about this last time, is one's around supplements, and the other question is more specific about a specific supplement is, do BCAAs help at all? So maybe to go into your stance on maybe some supplementation, and then what BCAAs are and do they help?
Yeah, so when chatting with athletes about supplements, I always want you to consider, like, what am I using this for? Because I think a lot of athletes will, like, hear about something and they have no idea what they're using it for. So but they just go buy it and start using it. So ask yourself, what am I using this for? Is it necessary for me and my situation? Is it going to interact with any medications that I'm taking? Because if you have a health condition and you randomly take a supplement, that might not be the best thing. Have I gotten testing done that shows that I might need a supplement? And specifically, I'm thinking iron, magnesium sometimes, vitamin D, those sorts of things. And then if you decide, yes, like, I need this for this specific thing, then what you want to look for are companies that are certified for sport. So that's a type of labeling that it's a third party testing. company label that tests for purity and banned substances, etc. And a lot of like the pro athletes will only use supplements that are certified for sport because they trust them as a brand, because they've been third party tested through this organization. However, I will say no supplement is 100% guaranteed to be 100% pure, just because they're not regulated very well by the FDA or any third party company, really. So just knowing all of that, and then as far as BCAAs go, those are your branch chain amino acids. So those are going to be your leucine, isoleucine, and valine, and they are essentially going to be the amino acids that promote the highest rates of muscle protein synthesis or recovery. As far as the supplement goes, you technically don't really need a BCAA supplement. So you can get sources of BCAAs from a protein powder. Like if you have a protein powder, that's going to have BCAAs in it. If you have food, like dairy is high in BCAAs, eggs are high in BCAAs, meat is high in BCAAs. Out of the plant-based sources, tofu and soy products are highest in BCAAs. So there are food-based sources that you can have that are high in BCAAs. You don't technically need a supplement. Now, where some people might use a BCAA supplement, I would say would be during long ultra endurance athlete like races. So they have been studied to help a little bit with mental acuity as the longer you run. So if you're doing a 100-miler, halfway through you're like starting to feel like, oh, like can't focus or something, and on like the rocks and roots, etc. BCAA supplement may be, again, like the research isn't 100% clear, but may be helpful for like mental acuity during long races. But during short races, no, there's no point in taking them. And I would save your money and buy food sources, or maybe even a protein powder that's like that you actually like. Because I think sometimes people get these ones from the store that they're like, this tastes gross, but I'm consuming it anyways, and it was cheap. But I would say, like, out of all the supplements, protein powders are one of the ones that I highly suggest spending more on and doing your research on the companies that you're buying, because they've been tested. A lot of protein powders have heavy metals in them. Contamination, sorry. That's the word I was looking for. So you really want to get certified for sport for a protein powder. So I don't know if there's any, I didn't see in the questions any other specific supplements. Oh, probiotics. There was a question about taking probiotics, which again, I think the hard part here is like there's a lot that we don't know about the microbiome. And I would ask you why you're taking the probiotic, especially if things are kind of normal with your digestion. Definitely would not recommend taking a probiotic to like mess up maybe the things you have going for you. Now, if you have gut issues, I think people just use the probiotic as a crutch. Like they're like, oh, I'll just take a probiotic and it'll solve the gut issues. But unfortunately, a lot of gut issues are more complex than that. And biggest thing that we see with our athletes is underfueling. So not taking in enough fuel, again, to support your training can actually slow down the digestive system and cause a whole host of GI issues. And that's one of the, I would say that's close to the top for causes of GI issues for athletes, is going to be that underfueling piece. And then you might have something more, like say you're to take antibiotics or something. That might be a situation where a probiotic might be warranted short term. I always kind of chuckle a little bit at athletes that are like, oh, I've been taking this probiotic for a year. And I'm like, a year? You just wasted so much money. Like your body after 60 to 90 days really doesn't care if you're taking a probiotic. Like it gets used to whatever you're taking. So if you fall into that category, definitely stop taking the probiotic. Like, you don't need it after 60 and 90 days, and save your money. The other thing to keep in mind is we can get probiotics from food sources. So we can get probiotics from kombucha, kimchi, unpasteurized sauerkraut, unpasteurized pickles, yogurt, plant-based or dairy-based yogurt both have probiotics in them. So there are a lot of things that have probiotics in them that you wouldn't even have to take a supplement. And you can eat those and have that be your source of a healthy microbiome. And then just remember that, like, a diverse diet will help promote a healthy microbiome. And you don't necessarily need the probiotic, I would say. So specific situations, maybe antibiotics, maybe. Or if somebody were to get some kind of like gut testing, like PCR stool testing or something done, and there was some kind of low levels of your commensal bacteria in the gut that you saw on the test, that might be a time where you would take a probiotic and help kind of proliferate the microbiome. So most cases, no, you don't need one. Some cases, maybe. I would not take it more than 60 to 90 days would be my overall analysis of the probiotic piece. Okay.
So
Okay.
if anyone has like any specific questions that have come up since we started, or want to ask anything, just put them in the chat. We've got about 20 minutes left to be respectful of time. So there are a couple questions here, ones that we can go through, but if you have any, throw them in the chat and we'll try to answer them.
Okay, and then there was also a question about, this isn't a supplement, but I don't know if you think we could go into the salt tabs
Yes.
question for summer training, because that's like pretty pertinent to what a lot of people are dealing with right now, even though in Colorado it's like cold right now, which is weird. So the question was, are salt tabs during summer training necessary? So I think this goes back to personalization, and it really depends on, are you getting sodium from other sources when you're fueling your training sessions, or is a salt tab the only way that you're getting sodium in during your training session? So when we're looking at building a fueling plan, we need to make sure we've got fluid intake dialed, sodium intake dialed. Sodium because it's the electrolyte that's lost in the highest amounts in sweat, and it affects so many different things: fluid balance, muscle cramping, utilization of carbohydrates in the system. So all of these different areas, sodium affects these different areas. And then your calorie carbohydrate consumption. So all those three pieces need to be dialed in. So for the sodium piece, I guess I would say for a lot of what I've started doing recently for long course triathletes and ultra endurance athletes, I've started having them do sodium sweat tests. There's a company called Levelin that you can go through and get an at-home kit. It's a one-time thing that you do. And you can take it at home, send it back in, get your sodium sweat concentration. That is not going to change all that much. It is pretty genetic. What is going to change is your fluid loss rate. So your fluid loss rate is the amount of fluids you are losing in like hot temperatures, cold temperatures, at altitude or not. So that can actually change, and then the sodium losses change based on your fluid loss rates. So if you're wanting to get more precise with your sodium sweat concentration, I highly recommend just doing a one-time sodium sweat test, see where you're at, because it can give you good insight on, I've had athletes that are losing 3,000 milligrams of sodium an hour versus athletes that are losing 400 milligrams of sodium an hour. So it's like, that's a big range. And the general recommendation is 250 to 500 milligrams of sodium replenishment every hour. So as you can imagine, if an athlete is like replacing 250 an hour and they're losing 3,000 an hour, that's going to be a problem. So if you're finding, like, if you're an athlete that doesn't seem to have many stomach issues and you want to go with the 250 to 500 milligram range per hour as a general guideline, that might work for you. But if you're somebody that's struggling in the heat, or you're getting, if your stomach's cramping, you're getting nauseous, you have muscle cramping's complicated, so I don't want to fully say that that's sodium related, but like, it could be sodium related. So if you're getting frequent muscle cramps, etc., then you might want to consider dialing this in a little bit more precisely, because I have seen it make huge differences in athlete performance, being able to better dial in their sodium intake every hour. So that's kind of like side tangent, but it's a good lead up to the answer to the question, which is, do I need salt tabs during a run? So once you have a good sense of, how much sodium am I aiming to take in every hour, where am I going to get that from? So you can get your sodium from gels. You can get your sodium from chews, like the Cliff Blocks they have the high sodium ones, margarita, salted watermelon. They're like 200 milligrams in 3 Cliff Blocks. The Never Second gels have 200 milligrams of sodium in a gel. So like, you can get sodium from gels and chews and food sources. You could get your sodium from hydration mix, like Tailwind or Scratch or something like that. And then the third option is you could get your sodium from the salt tabs, or the salt chews. So with the chews, see, it's good to know the difference. So the chews are going to be like the salt stick, they're chewables that you eat. They only have 50 milligrams of sodium in them. The salt tabs are going to vary, and most of them have 150 up to, I've had athletes find some that are 500 milligrams per tablet. So you got to know like how much sodium you're getting in from the product that you're using. So once if you decide, with the products that I'm using, like my gels, chews, hydration mix, I'm only getting 300 milligrams an hour of sodium, but I really want to get 500 an hour, then a salt tab might be effective or useful for you. If you are deciding I'm not going to use a hydration mix and my gels barely have any sodium in them, then maybe you need to use salt tabs with your water to get your sodium in. So they can come in handy in certain situations. Now, what I would say is, I don't like to see athletes popping 5 salt tabs an hour in addition to all the fueling plan stuff they're doing, and then they're just like willy-nilly taking in salt. I know there's like a lot of debate, I would say, in the sports nutrition space, as to like whether you can get too much sodium in. I personally have had athletes get too much sodium in. Typically it happens with my athletes that are out longer on race course, like long course triathlon or ultra endurance athletes, and they think they just need so much sodium and they're not even keeping up with fluids, and they just overdo it with their sodium intake. It's harder to do that in shorter events, I would say. But I have had an athlete do it in a shorter event too, because they had like 2 or 3 liquid IVs before their race, and then they started taking like all these salt tabs during their marathon, and it was just like way too much. So is it common? No, but is it possible? Yes. So you do want to be, I would say, cautious with like, oh, you don't want to overdo it. So that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully, I mean, I think it's helpful to have context on like the sodium piece, because you could just go off of the general recommendation and be left with a lot of questions and like things that you're wondering about. Hopefully that is kind of what that person was after.
Yeah.
Do you think that was specific enough, Corey?
Yeah, I think that was good. I think that was good. And I think one of the things you said, like with reds, and you've said this many times, is like, especially with like the portion sizes, is like I know myself, and I think we all tend to like jump to a conclusion if we read something like, oh, that must be why I'm X, or, I get cramps because probably I'm not drinking enough soda. So we, including myself, tend to jump to the solution. And we haven't diagnosed the problem yet.
Hmm.
So, I think if you are listening to this and some of these symptoms resonate with you, it's important probably just just like email your coach, whether it's me or Brandon, Julie, Tawny, and just say, hey, like I'm having these symptoms, this resonated with me. And then, we'll put you in touch with Kylie, or maybe we do a sweat test, or we kind of explore it a little bit before we jump to like, okay, I'm gonna go get, 500 milliliters of sodium because I think I'm not getting enough sodium. That may not be the issue. So I don't know. Would you
Yeah, I mean,
agree?
yeah, I see that as like, I think it's good for coaches to help dig a little bit deeper with their athletes if there's some kind of troubleshooting that needs to be done, like making sure all these components of the fueling plan are dialed in, et cetera. And then if more specifics are needed, or if it is, like I will say, like an underfueling red situation, like you need to get like more professional help in those situations. Um, I'm just gonna advocate for that. But yeah, like I think the coaches can help really facilitate some exploration there versus just going like, oh, it's sodium, and I got to do this. Same thing with muscle cramping. Like I see that as such a big confusion point for athletes. And they just automatically go to sodium or like magnesium or something. But there are so many different causes of muscle cramping. And if you just do that, it might not solve your issue and it might make things worse. So having working with somebody that like understands what the causes are and trying to troubleshoot with you, I think is really important versus like just using Google or like the influencer on Instagram.
All right. So we got about like, let's say a little under 10 minutes. Does anyone have any questions that they want to put into the chat? Um, I don't think so. Any other topics that you can think of? If not,
There was another question in here about um how should diet nutrition be adjusted in the 1 to 3 weeks before a marathon during taper. And I think that can be a good um point of it, like area of nutrition to examine for yourself. Um, Usually what we're doing with athletes is teaching them about like what would your nutrition look like on different days of training. So like during if you're 3 weeks out from a race and you're tapering, like you would still be able to like adjust your nutrition with reduced volume, etc. However, more specifically in the 2 to 3 days before your event, I do like to recommend some specific guidelines that would be different than maybe your daily nutrition. So normally looking at recommending a carb increase from this really depends on like what your highest baseline amount of carb intake is. So if you're somebody that struggles to get carbs in, if you try to do a carb increase and you're trying to get 500 grams of carbs in the 3 days before your marathon, that might not go over that well. So having an understanding of like, what is my starting point with carbohydrate intake? What's the highest I've gotten on like long run days can be a good place to start. And then looking at I'm going to give you guys numbers, 5 to 12 grams per kilogram body weight is where I go with carb increases. And really, that is, again, it's based on the body frame size and where your starting baseline is. And then that can give you a good sense of like personalized like carb intake. I think the big thing to focus on, if you haven't done a carb increase before a race, I suggest maybe doing it in your training. I've had athletes that we've worked with, they'll practice doing it for a day or two just to kind of see what that feels like. Because it is going to likely make you feel like a little bit like you also retain water when you are eating more carbohydrates. So you're going to feel maybe a little bit more water retention going on. And you don't want to step on the scale during that time and get all freaked out about it. But that is normal. You want your glycogen stores to be topped off. And you want to have full on, that's the point of the taper plus eating the right amount of carbohydrates, is that you're topping off glycogen stores and you're fueled up, ready for the race that's going to occur. So when you look at 5 to 12 grams per kilogram body weight carbs, again, that could be anywhere from like 300 to 550 for some athletes, depending on their body frame size. So once you kind of figure out what that looks like for you, making sure you've got a shift in like the carbs that you're consuming, they're not high fiber. You're going to keep them more simple carbs like your white rice, white pasta, bagels, tortillas, graham crackers, gummies, etc. Things that you might not always eat all the time, but are, in this case, you want to, because they're easily digested. Your body's going to hold on to them and store them as glycogen, and then you're going to be able to use them for energy production in your race. So what you want to do is focus on simple carbohydrates, low fiber, and then trying to figure out, what are going to be the easiest ways for me to get in carbohydrates, like from the foods that I like. So, if you're not somebody that likes bagels, then forcing in 9 bagels throughout your day is not going to be the best strategy. So think about like, I really like cereal, so I'll use cereal as one of my carb increase foods. I really like gummy bears, so I'll use those, or hydration mix. Like, I find liquid carbohydrates easy to get down during a carb increase. So thinking of foods that might be easier for you to get down. And then having a general sense of like, I kind of standardize carbohydrates into a serving. What does a serving look like? So 1 serving of rice, pasta, beans, 2 slices of bread, etc., is going to be about 45 grams of carbs. So when you look at like your 500, if your target is 500 grams of carbs, and you know that you have to get in like a certain number of cups or a certain number of servings, that can be helpful to kind of figure out, like, throughout my day, how am I going to get these servings of carbohydrates in throughout the day? With carbohydrate rich foods, the thing is a lot of carb foods are very similar in their carb count. So I always tell my athletes, in general, a cup of cereal, a cup of rice, a cup of pasta, a cup of these grains and things are about 45 grams of carbs, which can be really helpful to like visualize what you need. And then thinking about, if it's going to be a hot race, you might want to do a sodium increase the day before. So doing like 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams of extra sodium. If it's going to be hot or humid, I do recommend that like a sodium preload type situation. You do want to stay away from a lot of whole fruits and veggies the day before an event, which is pretty self-explanatory, but like, we don't want to increase risk of GI distress. So those are just some basic tips, but like, oftentimes with athletes that I'm working with, we will build a full on like carb increase plan for 2 to 3 days that they can use before their target event.
And we had one question kind of along the lines in the chat. In fueling for long runs, do you advocate one way or the other regarding added sugars versus natural sugars?
Not really, because when you are out on a run, your body is literally using the carbohydrate for energy production. So it doesn't really matter if you are taking in a more natural like honey or I don't know, white sugar or something. All of them are carbohydrates that your body is using for energy production. So I think athletes sometimes get too hung up on like nuances with processed foods and things, especially when they're doing their training. That would be the least of my concerns, I guess, would be like, what type of processed food or non-processed food are you using during your long runs? If you want to worry about that outside of training, I think that you can worry about that a little bit more then, but they're going to break down the same and be utilized the same. Now, what will be different is if you're consuming a complex carbohydrate versus a simple carbohydrate. So if you decide that you're going to use potatoes or something, potatoes are actually a more complex carb source. You're going to use potatoes and then versus using a Jill. A potato might break down a little bit more slowly in the body, so you have to be of the understanding that you might not get as quick of an energy boost from that potato versus the energy gel that you're using. So having an understanding of like the types of carbohydrates that you're using is important. And then the other thing you need to pay attention to is like, is this a glucose? Like, is it glucose based? Is it fructose based? Like, is it a mixture of types of sugars? Because our gut has a limited number of channels or doors to use glucose versus fructose. So you don't want to consume just fructose and have all this fructose coming in and have that overwhelm your system. You could end up with some stomach issues. So if you are consuming over 60 grams of carbs an hour during your training sessions, it's a good idea to take a little bit closer look at like, am I using glucose and fructose? Because that's going to optimize my absorption of the sugars that I'm taking in.
Okay. We are at, well, 6 o'clock in California. So I think that's our time. I appreciate
Yeah.
taking the hour. I hope this was helpful for everyone. It is being recorded, and once I get that loaded up, I'll put that back into the resources section if you want to, I guess, reference it. But I do recommend going into the resource section and looking at all these handouts she's done. They're really good. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for attending and hope you have a good Tuesday night. And thank you, Kylee, for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Oh, and if anyone has Instagram, I do a lot of great infographics on my page, Fly Nutrition 3. So that's a good resource for you guys to follow if you need some additional education.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
Kylee.
bye.
Thanks, everyone.